Bhuva swaha tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo devasya dhimahi Diyo yo nah prachodayat Om Swasti na Indro Vidrashavaha Swasti na Pusha Vishvavedaha Swasti na Stakrisho Arishtanemihi Swasti no Brahspatir Dadatu Om Aditya Dyaura Aditya Antariksham Aditya Mata Sa Pita Sa Putraha Vishve Deva Aditi Pancha Jana Aditir Jatama Aditir Janitvam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hello, namaste, welcome to my channel and welcome to my video, Rig Veda Summary and Symbolism. This video is my attempt to summarize the Rig Veda. This is going to be a broad overview. I'll give you some background information, then I'll go into the themes and the motifs, what we can learn about the belief system as it is enshrined in the text, and I'll show you some examples and give you an idea of what it's like to read it. First of all, what is the Rig Veda? The Rig Veda is the foundational text of Hinduism, also called Sanatana Dharma, which means the eternal religion, also called Vedic Dharma, which means Vedic religion. The Rig Veda translates to knowledge of praises in Sanskrit, and it is the first of the four Vedas, which are the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, knowledge of song, Yajur Veda, knowledge of sacrifice, and Atharva Veda, knowledge of everyday matters, also called knowledge of magical rituals. The Rig Veda is the oldest known epic composition in Sanskrit and in any Indo-European language. It is a collection of over 1,000 hymns called suktas that are dedicated to various deities, to animals, aspects of nature. It contains multiple creation stories, tales of epic battles, and most of all, prayers. The Rig Veda gives us a glimpse into the culture of the Arya, a group of people who inhabited this region, which is now called Northwest India and a little bit of Pakistan. Of course, back then, those borders didn't exist, and the names India and Pakistan didn't exist either. This first image is delineated and dated according to conventional historians, and this map is a map of the Indus Valley civilization, which is much older, but many people believe that the Rig Veda was actually composed by members of the Indus culture. And I think this makes a lot of sense because there are actually a lot of suggestive artifacts that we find from the Indus Valley. So who wrote the Rig Veda? Of course, academics say that the authors are unknown or anonymous, but traditionally, Hindus say that the Vedas were divinely received and then recorded by the Vedic sages, who we call the Rishis. The protagonists of the Rig Veda are the Arya, meaning the noble ones or the civilized ones, the gods, who are called the Adityas, and the antagonists are the demons, the sinners, the darkness, and a group of people called the Dasyu. Problems and/or challenges with the translation. The Rig Veda is notoriously difficult to translate. Some people would say it's impossible to translate, and some would even say that it's blasphemous to translate, and to take this out of its intended language, which is Rig Vedic Sanskrit. So why is it so difficult? It's difficult for technical reasons because it is so long, because it is an archaic form of Sanskrit, which Sanskrit in itself is already an ancient language, but Rig Vedic Sanskrit is even more ancient, and because it is so cryptic. It's cryptic to the point that even when it's translated, the people reading the translation struggle to understand it because it's so strange. Here are some quotations from a translator named Wendy Doniger. There are several good reasons why it has remained hidden for so many years. It is so long, 1,028 hymns, each averaging about 10 verses, that a complete translation is a daunting prospect. And it is so complex that most serious translations have been rendered unreadable by critical apparatus. In many places, a difficult idea is couched in simple language. In others, a simple idea is obscured by difficult language. Each translator has encountered the latter problem, and such instances occur frequently in the Rig Veda, but so do instances of the opposite type. Several hymns are simple enough to translate, but impossible to understand. Also, here's a quote about the difficulty of translating Sanskrit prayers. It is impossible for a translator to maintain pure objectivity in composing an English interpretation of the glorious Sanskrit mantras. No matter how hard one might try, some part of his own experience, his own philosophy, or his own intellectual understanding will no doubt creep in. Swami Satyananda Saraswati. Some religious reasons as to why this would be is that it's cryptic on purpose because no one is supposed to understand it besides the Brahmins. The Brahmins are the priests, and it's their job to learn it, memorize it, and then pass it down to the next generation. It's cryptic because the language is metaphorical. It's not meant to be understood literally at all, and I think this is a big possibility because I'm familiar enough with Sanskrit to know that one word can have a whole host of different meanings, and therefore different translations, and there can even be multiple layers of meanings, starting at the most literal and then going to the most metaphysical and esoteric. Another theory on the Rig Veda is that it's not meant to be understood intellectually through the words, but is actually understood through the sounds and the vibrations and the melodies of listening to it being chanted in the correct way. So the true meaning of it is imparted in an intuitive fashion, so that it's transcending words, and at that point it's actually transcending the language itself. So here's a quote on that. The transcendental sound of the Vedas is very difficult to comprehend and manifests on different levels within the prana, that means breath, senses, and the mind. This Vedic sound is unlimited, very deep, and unfathomable, just like the ocean. Srimad Bhagavatam 11:21-36. And this is why the Brahmins put so much emphasis on correct pronunciation, on perfecting the tone, the rhythm, the melody, and during their training they spend so much time just practicing on making the sounds. The vowels have to be perfect, the consonants have to be perfect. It's meant to be recited and to be heard. It's not meant to be read. So traditionally, only the Brahmins would have access to the Rig Veda in the first place. Let's talk about the dating. From what I've seen, there's no way to give a definite date to this document because it was transmitted orally for hundreds and hundreds of years, possibly thousands and thousands of years. So all the dates are speculations based on style, content, and by comparing this stage of Sanskrit to other ancient Indo-European languages. The date of composition, which is set by conventional historians, is always shortly after 2000 BC. Here are some proposed dates. Between 1500 and 1000 BC, 1400 BC, between 1200 and 900 BC, and between 1900 and 1200 BC. I am aware that traditionally the Vedas are considered to be much older, and many Hindus believe that the Rig Veda is actually thousands and thousands of years older than this, and that may be true. Personally, I'm very skeptical about mainstream accounts of history, and I like to entertain all kinds of alternative theories Unfortunately, there is no way that I can even approach this question of trying to date ancient documents, so that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just presenting different viewpoints, and you can see how you feel about it. Translators and translations. I read from two different sources, Wendy Doniger and Ralph T. Griffith. Doniger published her translation in 1981, and Griffith published his translation in 1896. Doniger's is much easier to read, I think partly because she intentionally chose the hymns that were more easy to translate. She translated it into simple, modern language, and the way that she structured the wording in the verses is easy to follow. Overall, she just made it much simpler and easy to read, but still eloquent. However, Griffith's translation can be a chore to get through. It's very dramatic and grandiose, which I like, but it's much more confusing. It feels like the words and the sentences are out of order. It feels like he's making it more complicated than it needs to be. I assume that maybe he translated it word for word and then tried to maintain the original sentence structure to try to keep it as close to the original text as he could, while still making it make sense in English. And for the most part, you can make sense out of it, but there are many times when you have to read it very carefully. Griffith also uses a lot of outdated English words, and it ends up making the hymns sound weird, and sometimes they sound unintentionally funny. First impressions. First things first, I'm going to start with the things that jumped out at me the most. Number 1. It is significantly different from the post-Rig Vedic literature. It is noticeably different from the Upanishads, from the Mahabharata, including the Gita and the Ramayana, and it is very different from the Puranas. In terms of style, the use of language, the pantheon of deities is different, the way the deities are described is different, and because of the cryptic nature of it, I had a harder time reading it and understanding it than I have compared to any of the other Hindu texts that I've read, including the Upanishads, which also have a reputation for being cryptic, but I actually understood those way more than I understood the Rig Veda. Again, you can say this all comes down to the translation, but that is the crux of the problem. No one can even agree on how to translate it, or if it even should be translated at all. So overall, it feels like it's very far removed from contemporary Hinduism, as it is practiced today, except for the occasions on which it is recited by Brahmins, for example, during weddings and funerals. However, even though I just said that, there are so many points of connection from the Rig Veda to contemporary Hinduism, and as I summarize the text, I will be bringing up examples of that as I go along. Number 2, lack of discernible organization. Technically, it is organized into books called mandalas, and then each mandala contains several hymns. But why I say it seems unorganized is because the hymns are not arranged in any particular order. It's not ordered by subject, and it's not in chronological order either, so it just feels very jumbled. The hymns themselves don't seem to have any format, although they are supposed to be sung in a specific rhythm and melody, so I guess they're supposed to be formatted sonically. But when you read the prayers visually, they don't seem to have any format. And they often don't focus on one god or goddess. They praise multiple deities within the same hymn. They'll start by talking about one, and then they'll shift to another and another. And then sometimes they kind of shift from one subject to the next. And they can also shift from talking in first person and then to talking in third person, and shifting from one person's perspective to another person's perspective. It's just continually shifting. Number 3, it feels incomplete. Something kind of disorienting about reading the Rig Veda is that it never just sits you down and tells you a story from beginning to end. Instead, it's constantly referencing things that happened in the past, so it feels like they were talking to people who already knew these stories and were familiar enough with them that they could just say something like, "Hey, remember when Indra killed the giant serpent?" Or, "Hey, remember when the Ashwins rescued that guy from the flood?" It also name drops people without explaining who they are. So it feels like they're referencing a body of work that's even older. There's even a point where they mention, quote, the ancient tales, which the Rig Veda is already a collection of ancient tales, so here they were referencing something that's even more ancient. So there's definitely information that we're missing, and that's part of why it can be so confusing, because there's a lack of necessary context. Hymn 427, The Falcon. I, as I lay within the womb, considered all generations of these gods in order. 100 iron fortresses confined me, but forth I flew with rapid speed as a falcon. Not at his own free pleasure did he bear me. He conquered with his strength and manly courage. Straightway the bold one left the fiends behind him, and passed the winds as he grew yet more mighty. When with a loud cry from heaven, down sped the falcon, thence hasting, like the wind he bore the bold one. Then, wildly raging in his mind, the archer Krishanu aimed and loosed the string to strike him. The falcon bore him from heaven's lofty summit, as the swift car of Indra's friend bore Buju. Then, downward hither fell a flying feather of the bird, hasting forward in his journey. And now, let Bhagavan accept the beaker, white, filled with milk, filled with the shining liquid, the best of meath, which the priests have offered. That Indra to his joy may drink, the hero, that he may take and drink it to his rapture. Just a quick note here, this hymn is obviously about a giant bird. Griffith translates it as falcon, but Doniger translates it as eagle. In the original text, it switches from the point of view of the falcon to the point of view of Soma without explicitly stating so I added the words in the brackets for clarity. I did compare both translations of this, but the truth is they're not that different. The only difference is the verbiage. But I chose this one to illustrate the shifting points of view because it goes from the falcon to Soma to third-person narrator, and that it also drops us in the middle of this story without actually telling us what's going on here. Who is the falcon? Why is he being held in this fortress? Who is Krishanu? Why is he shooting arrows at the falcon? Who is Buju? We, as the readers, we have no idea. Number 4. Conflicting accounts of creation. This is another puzzling aspect of the Rig Veda, that there are multiple accounts of creation, for example, the origin of the universe and the origin of the gods. I'm aware of contradictions between separate texts. The Puranas, for example, there's tons of Puranas and they all contradict each other. But here we have all kinds of contradictions within the very same text, and there's no attempt to try to reconcile them. Number 5. Confusing use of language. The suktas are full of metaphors and similes, they're dense with poetic imagery, and allusions to so many different things that it's difficult to know when it's describing something literally or when it's just using these visual metaphors. It feels like it's speaking to you in riddles because essentially it is speaking to you in riddles. It feels like you're dropping in on a conversation that wasn't really meant for you, because technically it wasn't, but that's what makes it so intriguing. The prose is full of paradoxes and contradictions. In general, there's just an abundance of puzzling statements. Hymn 165. One-minded, wise, they tracked thee like a thief lurking in a dark cave with a stolen cow, thee claiming worship, bearing it to the gods. There nigh to thee sat all the holy ones. The gods approached the ways of holy law. There was a gathering vast as heaven itself. The waters feed with praise the growing babe, born nobly in the womb, the seat of law. Like grateful food, like some wide dwelling place, like a fruit-bearing hill, a wholesome stream, like a steed urged to run in swift career, rushing like Sindhu, who may check his course? Kin as a brother to his sister the floods, he eats the woods as a king eats the rich. When through the forest, urged by wind, he spreads, verily, Agni shears the hair of the earth. Like a swan sitting in the floods, he pants wisest in the mind. Mid men he wakes at morn. A sage like Soma, sprung from law, he grew like some young creature, mighty, shining far. Here Agni is the god of fire, Sindhu is the Sindhu river that flows through the Indus Valley, and Soma is both a magical elixir and the god of that elixir. Hymn 164, Asya Vamasya, also called the Riddle of the Sacrifice, verses 4 through 7. Who saw the newborn one? The one with the bones who was brought forth by the boneless one? Where was the breath and blood and soul of the earth? Who can go to ask this from someone who knows? An ignorant fool, I ask in my mind about the hidden footprints of the gods. Over the young calf, the poet stretched out 7 threads to weave. Unknowing, ignorant, I ask for knowledge about it from the poets who know. What is the one who in the form of the unborn propped apart these 6 realms of space? Let him who really knows proclaim here the hidden place of that beloved bird. The cows give milk from his head. Wearing a cloak, they drank water with their feet. Number 6. The Rig Vedic gods. The Rig Veda has a huge pantheon of gods and goddesses. Some of them are discussed extensively and some are not. What's disappointing is that they are often not described in detail, so it's hard to envision them. A lot of them have overlapping descriptions, for example, wearing golden armor and riding chariots. They have overlapping epithets, overlapping functions. In the Mahabharata and the Puranic literature, all the gods and goddesses are described in great detail and they're given unique characteristics. It describes their hair, their clothing, their skin color, the objects they're holding. They have unique personality traits, like likes and dislikes. In the Rig Veda, the gods and goddesses are referred to as the Adityas, which means the children of Aditi, who can be described as the primordial goddess or the mother goddess of the Rig Veda. In the post-Rig Vedic literature, the name Aditya is a title given exclusively to the sun god Surya. There is a plethora of different deities mentioned here. Some I was familiar with and some I wasn't. I was actually quite surprised at how many names were in there that I didn't recognize. There are some gods and goddesses from the Rig Veda that have fallen out of favor or that have changed in some way. Either their function has changed or their level of importance has changed. For example, Indra, he's the god of thunder and lightning. He is the star of the Rig Veda, but nowadays he's very seldom worshipped. There is also Varuna, he was the guardian of the sacred law, and also the god of punishment. He was one of the top gods, but after the Rig Veda, he somehow became relegated to being god of the ocean, and he is also worshipped very rarely. In other cases, the opposite happened. Some deities that played a lesser role or were only mentioned a handful of times rose to the top and became among the most popular deities that are being worshipped today. For example, Vishnu. Vishnu is huge. He is arguably the most important god of contemporary Hinduism, and a huge portion of Hindus worship him as the supreme god. We also have Rudra, who we now call Shiva. Today, he is also one of the most popular gods, and many Hindus believe that Shiva is the supreme god instead of Vishnu. Other gods and goddesses that maintained their status would be Surya, the sun god, Saraswati, Yama, the god of death, and Agni, the god of fire. Some figures seem to have disappeared altogether. For example, Pushan, Bhaga, Adyaman, the Maruts, and the Ribus. I honestly had never heard of them before. So here's an example. This is arguably one of the most important hymns. I'm going to say it's one of the most important because it contains some key verses that have become very popular and well-known prayers. specifically verse 6 and verse 10, which I myself recited in Sanskrit at the very beginning of the video. Hymn 189. May powers auspicious come to us from every side, never deceived, unhindered, and victorious, that the gods ever may be with us for our gain, our guardians, day by day, unceasing in their care. May the auspicious favor of the gods be ours, on us descend the bounty of the righteous gods. The friendship of the gods have we devoutly sought, so may the gods extend our life, that we may live. We call on them hither with a hymn of olden time. Bhaga, the friendly Daksha, Mitra, Aditi, Aryaman, Varuna, Soma, and the Ashwins. May Saraswati, auspicious, grant felicity. May the wind waft to us that pleasant medicine. May earth, our mother, give it, and our father heaven, and the joy-giving stones that press the soma juice. Ashwins, may ye, for whom our spirits long, hear this. Him we invoke for aid who reigns supreme, the Lord of all that stands or moves, inspirer of the soul, that Pushan may promote the increase of our wealth, our keeper and our guard infallible for our good. Illustrious far and wide, may Indra prosper us, may Pushan prosper us, master of all wealth. May Tarksha, with uninjured fellies, prosper us. Brihaspati, vouchsafe to us prosperity. The Maruts, sons of Prishni, born by spotted steeds, moving in glory, oft visiting holy rites. Sages, whose tongue is Agni, brilliant as the sun, hither let all the gods for our protection come. Gods, may we with our ears listen to what is good, and with our eyes see what is good. Ye holy ones, with firm limbs and bodies, may we, extolling you, attain the term of life appointed by the gods. 100 autumns stand before us, O ye gods, within whose space ye bring our bodies to decay, and within whose space our sons become fathers in turn. Break ye not in the midst of our course of fleeting life. Aditi is the heaven, Aditi is the midair, Aditi is the mother, the sire, and son. Aditi is all gods, Aditi is 5-classed men. Aditi is all that hath been born and shall be born.